The first scream was a sharp, tearing sound that ripped through the usual Sunday afternoon quiet of Elmwood Drive. I was on my porch, trying to coax my neighbor's cat, Mittens, down from the oak tree. Suddenly, a figure stumbled out of Mrs. Gable's house, not walking, but lurching, with a vacant stare and a guttural moan. Then another. And another. People I'd known my whole life, people who'd waved hello every morning, were now shambling, their eyes milky white, their mouths smeared with something dark and sticky. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't just a few people, it was spreading like a plague. The rhythmic, sickening sound of flesh tearing and guttural cries began to fill the air. I saw Mr. Henderson, the retired librarian, his usually gentle face contorted in a silent, horrifying snarl as he lunged at a fleeing delivery driver, his teeth sinking into the man's arm. The driver's scream was cut short as more figures converged, a frenzy of mindless hunger. The world I knew, the one with manicured lawns and polite conversations, was dissolving before my eyes, replaced by a primal, terrifying scene of utter chaos. Panic clawed at my throat, but a strange sort of paralysis held me. What could I even do? I watched, frozen, as a horde of the infected, those once familiar faces now twisted into grotesque masks of hunger, swarmed down the street, drawn by the sounds of living flesh. I ducked back inside, slamming the door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the lock. The cat, Mittens, was long gone. I ran to the window, peeking through a gap in the curtains. The infected were everywhere. They were tearing into cars, their nails scratching at metal, their moans a constant, unsettling drone. I saw a woman, her face streaked with tears and dirt, trying to drag her child towards safety, only to be overwhelmed by the relentless tide. The sheer savagery, the utter lack of humanity, was more than I could comprehend. It felt like a nightmare, a twisted hallucination, but the guttural growls and the sounds of violence were all too real. My mind raced, a jumble of fear and disbelief. This wasn't a movie, this was my reality now. What would you do if you saw your entire neighborhood turn into a feeding frenzy? I knew I couldn't stay here. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant moan, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I needed to get out, but where? The streets were a death sentence. I thought of my meager supplies, the half-empty pantry, the dwindling water in the tap. The sheer, overwhelming dread of facing this alone began to set in. The sounds of destruction seemed to be growing closer. I had to make a decision, and fast. This is my last chance to record this. If anyone finds this, if anyone is out there listening, please know that it wasn't for lack of trying. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more, and give this a like if you're still fighting. I need to move. The rusted metal door groaned in protest as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow, descending staircase. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. Each step echoed in the oppressive silence, a stark contrast to the cacophony that had been the soundtrack to my existence for days. I clutched the makeshift weapon tighter, its familiar weight a small comfort. The further down I went, the more the sounds from above faded, replaced by a low, persistent hum that vibrated through the stone. It was a sound I hadn't heard before, and it set my teeth on edge. At the bottom, a vast cavern opened up. Dim, phosphorescent moss clung to the walls, casting an eerie green glow. In the center of the cavern stood a colossal, obsidian structure, pulsing with that same low hum. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, an impossible geometric shape that seemed to warp the very air around it. Strange symbols, etched into its surface, glowed faintly. I moved cautiously towards it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Was this what they were after? What was this thing? As I got closer, I noticed smaller, similar structures scattered around the main one, each emitting a fainter version of the hum. They looked almost organic, yet undeniably artificial. I reached out a trembling hand, not quite daring to touch the obsidian surface. The humming intensified, and the symbols on the structure flared brighter. A wave of energy washed over me, not painful, but disorienting, like stepping into a dream. Images flashed through my mind, stars, vast and silent, then a sudden explosion of light, followed by darkness. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The disorientation subsided, but something had changed. The world felt different, sharper. I could hear the scuttling of unseen creatures in the periphery, the faint drip of water far above, all with a clarity that was almost overwhelming. The fear, though still present, was now mingled with a strange sense of understanding. The humming of the obsidian structures seemed to resonate within me, a silent communication. I looked back up the stairs, towards the world I had left behind. The sounds of destruction had stopped. A profound silence had fallen. I didn't know if that was good or bad. This place, this subterranean world, offered a sanctuary of sorts, a reprieve from the chaos. But it also felt like an ending, a surrender. The choice was stark: return to a world that was clearly falling apart, or embrace this new, alien existence. My instincts screamed for survival, and this place, with its strange power, felt like the only path forward, however uncertain. I took a deep breath, the earthy, metallic air filling my lungs, and turned my back on the staircase. Okay, so, imagine this, Marcus. He's just some regular guy, a librarian from Des Moines. Woke up one Tuesday and the world was just gone. Not in a quiet way, either. The first thing he heard wasn't the usual morning traffic, but screams. Just pure, unadulterated terror echoing down his street. He stumbled to his window, pulled back the curtains, and saw it. Mrs. Henderson, his sweet old neighbor who always gave him cookies, was on her lawn, gnawing on someone's arm. Not biting, actually gnawing. Like a rabid dog. And the person, well, they weren't screaming anymore. Their eyes were milky, and their skin was this sickly gray. Marcus just froze. His mind couldn't process it. This wasn't some movie, this was real. He saw more people then, stumbling, lurching, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their jaws hung open, slack, revealing broken, bloody teeth. Some were dragging themselves, their own flesh ripped and torn, but they just kept coming. The sheer, unthinking hunger in their eyes, the raw, guttural sounds they made, it was primal. It seared into Marcus's brain. He slammed the curtains shut, his hands shaking so bad he could barely breathe. He stayed in his house for 2 days, rationing the meager supplies he had, listening to the symphony of horror outside. The screams eventually faded, replaced by those horrifying groans and the wet, tearing sounds of what? He didn't want to think about it. Then the power went out. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that was almost worse than the noise. Hunger started to gnaw at him, a gnawing that felt sickeningly familiar after what he'd seen. He had to move, he had to find something. Stepping outside was like entering a nightmare. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something acrid, metallic. Cars were abandoned haphazardly, some with doors still open. He saw a group of them, maybe 5 or 6, clustered around a fallen figure in the middle of the road. They weren't even bothering to be subtle anymore. Marcus backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needed a plan, but his mind was a jumble of fear and disbelief. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. Everyone he'd ever known could be one of them now. The thought was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He just needed to survive, one agonizing step at a time, in this new, broken world. It started as a whisper, then a scream, then a cacophony of pure, unadulterated terror. I was on my way to the corner store, just grabbing some milk, when the world decided to go sideways. 1 minute, people were just acting weird. The next, they were eating people. And not in a metaphorical, he's eating up all the attention, kind of way. No, this was actual, flesh-ripping, blood-splattering, gut-spilling eating. I saw Mrs. Henderson, bless her sweet, floral-scented soul, gnawing on what used to be Officer Miller's arm. Her eyes were milky, vacant, but her jaw worked with a relentless, primal hunger. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in high definition, except there was no remote to turn it off. Panic was a physical thing, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. I ran. Just ran. Didn't think, didn't plan, just fled the unfolding horror. Every face I saw was a potential threat. A child, stumbling and crying, suddenly lurched towards a fallen woman, its tiny hands tearing into her side. It wasn't even a struggle anymore, it was pure, instinctual savagery. The sounds, oh God, the sounds. Guttural moans, the wet ripping of flesh, the sickening crunch of bone. It burrowed into my brain, a soundtrack to the end of everything I knew. I remember ducking into a deserted alley, pressing myself against the cold brick, hyperventilating, trying to make myself invisible. The desperation hit me then, hard. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, and the world was a charnel house. Food. That was the first immediate, crushing problem. The corner store was a no-go. Too many shambling horrors, too many screams. I scrounged through overflowing bins, finding half-eaten cans and stale bread. It tasted like ash, but it kept the gnawing emptiness in my stomach at bay. Every rustle, every distant groan, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, or rather, a risk I couldn't take. If I closed my eyes, I knew I wouldn't wake up. Not truly. The fear of being bitten, of feeling that transformation, that loss of self, was a constant, icy dread. I saw a man try to reason with one of them, pleading with his son, who was now a shambling mockery of his former self. The son, he just kept coming, that vacant stare fixed on his father's throat. The look on the father's face as it happened, it haunts me. It's a picture of utter, soul-crushing despair. Trust. It evaporated like mist in the sun. Every living person I encountered was a question mark, a potential vector, a possible betrayal waiting to happen. Could I trust them not to panic and turn on me? Could I trust them not to be already infected? The paranoia was a venom of its own. Sarah was holed up in what used to be a quaint little diner on the outskirts of Oakhaven. The smell of stale coffee and something vaguely metallic, blood, probably, hung heavy in the air. Just hours ago, she'd been arguing with her brother, Mark, about whether they should try to reach the military checkpoint a few towns over. Then the screaming started. Not distant, panicked screams, but guttural, wet sounds of tearing flesh, right outside. She'd peeked through the grimy window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What she saw, it's burned into her brain. A woman, someone Sarah might have seen at the local grocery store, was on the ground, her neighbor, a man Sarah knew as Mr. Henderson, hunched over her. But it wasn't Mr. Henderson anymore. His eyes were milky white, his skin pale and stretched, and his mouth. Jesus, his mouth was smeared with something dark and sticky, tearing at the woman's exposed ribs. He wasn't human. Not even close. Another figure stumbled out from behind a car, this one a teenager, still wearing a school uniform, its movements jerky and unnatural, its jaw hanging open, a low moan escaping its throat. The sheer wrongness of it all, the violation of everything natural, made Sarah gag. She scrambled back from the window, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Mark was still beside her, his face ashen. He'd seen it too. The initial shock had quickly morphed into a raw, animalistic fear. They had to move. Staying put was a death sentence. But where? Every road, every alleyway, was now a potential death trap. The noise outside intensified, a cacophony of groans and a sickening crunch of bone. Sarah felt a primal urge to curl up and disappear, but Mark grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "We gotta go," he choked out, his voice trembling. Now. They bolted out the back door, into what they hoped was a less populated area. The silence of the countryside was a deceptive lullaby, broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant, unsettling groans that seemed to carry on the wind. They were out of food, and the water from the diner's tap had a faint, coppery taste she didn't dare dwell on. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. The trust they had in the familiar world had shattered. Now, every living soul was suspect. Could the farmer they passed an hour ago have been bitten? Was that distant figure a survivor, or one of them? The constant knot of anxiety in Sarah's stomach was a relentless companion, a gnawing reminder that survival was a brutal, unforgiving game. The reality of their situation was stark. This wasn't a movie, this was a nightmare made flesh. They were alone, utterly alone, in a world that had become a charnel house. The hunger pangs were starting to set in, a cruel irony when surrounded by so much death. The faint scent of decay seemed to cling to their clothes, a constant, unwelcome perfume. The road ahead was uncertain, a treacherous path paved with the remnants of a civilization that had crumbled in the blink of an eye. They pushed on. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a gnawing exhaustion. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant sound made them jump. They found a discarded backpack near an overturned car, a small victory in the otherwise bleak landscape. Inside, a half-empty bottle of water and a granola bar. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going for a few more hours. The water tasted stale, metallic, but it was the best thing they'd ever had. They avoided the main roads, sticking to the overgrown paths and back alleys. The silence was the worst part. No birdsong, no distant traffic, just the crunch of their own footsteps and the heavy beat of their hearts. They'd seen the remnants of a skirmish a few miles back, scorch marks on buildings, shattered glass, and the lingering smell of smoke. It was a stark reminder of how quickly things had fallen apart. They didn't want to think about what had happened there. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they found a small, abandoned convenience store. The door was ajar, creaking eerily with the breeze. Inside, shelves were bare, but they managed to find a few cans of peaches and a can opener. The sweetness of the fruit was overwhelming, a burst of flavor that made their eyes water. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, knowing this might be their last proper meal for a long time. The night was cold. They huddled together for warmth, the thin walls of the store offering little protection from the elements. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by nightmares and the constant fear of being discovered. They talked in hushed tones, sharing what little hope they had left, clinging to each other like lifelines. The future was an abyss, but for now, they had each other. That was something. The next day brought a new determination. They needed to find a more secure place, a place where they could rest and plan their next move. The granola bar was gone, the peaches were a memory. Hunger was a dull ache in their stomachs, but they pushed it down. They had to. They came across a small, fenced-off compound, formerly a school. The gate was locked, but a section of the fence had been broken. Inside, the grounds were overgrown, but the buildings looked intact. They cautiously made their way inside, the silence inside the compound amplifying their senses. They found a classroom that seemed relatively secure, with sturdy furniture they could use to barricade the door. The windows were boarded up, but there was a small gap that allowed them a sliver of light. They explored the rest of the school, finding a few more canned goods and some blankets. It wasn't a palace, but it was a haven. For now, they were safe. The hope, a fragile seedling, began to push through the hardened earth of their despair. They could survive this. They had to. The moment it started, it felt like a bad dream, one of those ones where you can't quite wake up. I was at the downtown market, grabbing some bread, when I heard the screams. Not just screams, but the kind that rip from your throat when you're being torn apart. I peeked out from behind a fruit stand and saw it. People, they were just gone, replaced by something else. Shambling, jerking, eyes milky white. One of them, a woman I'd seen buying apples just an hour before, was gnawing on someone's arm, making this wet, tearing sound that still stuck in my head. It wasn't just a few, it was spreading, a wave of monstrous hunger washing over the city. Panic hit me like a physical blow. My first instinct was to run, to get anywhere, but where? Every street seemed to be a scene from hell. I saw a man, still trying to reason with one of them, his face a mask of disbelief, before it lunged. The way they moved, so unnatural, so wrong, it was more terrifying than the biting itself. It felt like the world had gone insane, and I was the only one still clinging to sanity. I ducked back into the market, my heart hammering against my ribs, the smell of rotting fruit suddenly mingling with something far more sinister. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a fear so deep it felt like it was rearranging my insides. I was alone, truly alone, in a place that was no longer recognizable, no longer safe. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant noise a harbinger of doom. I had to move, had to find a place, any place, that wasn't crawling with them. The thought of food, of water, seemed impossibly distant. Survival wasn't about finding supplies anymore, it was about not becoming one of them. The air grew thick, heavy with a silence that was more unnerving than any sound. I pressed myself against the rough brick of the building, trying to melt into the grimy surface. The shuffling, the guttural groans, were closer now. They weren't just a general menace, they were a specific, approaching horror. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive quiet. I scanned the street, desperation clawing at me. There had to be another way, a hidden alley, a broken window into somewhere, anywhere, else. A flash of movement caught my eye, a figure darting between two overturned cars. Hope, a fragile, desperate thing, flickered. It wasn't one of them. It looked human. I waited, straining my ears. Then, a whisper, barely audible, drifted on the poisoned air. Over here. I hesitated. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. But the alternative was to wait here, to be found by the encroaching tide. Taking a deep breath, I broke cover, sprinting towards the sound. I rounded the corner of a derelict shop and saw them. Two people, huddled in the doorway of what looked like an old bookstore, their faces etched with a weariness I understood all too well. They weren't armed, not in the way I'd expected, but they held rudimentary tools, a crowbar, a sharpened pipe. "You're alone?" the woman asked, her voice raspy. I nodded, unable to find my own. Good. Better than a group. Less noise. The man gestured with his head, a silent invitation. I slipped into the relative darkness of the doorway beside them. "We saw you," he said, his eyes darting back to the street. "You're quick. Smart, maybe." They shared a meager portion of dried fruit and a small canteen of water. It tasted like salvation. They explained they'd been moving through the city for days, scavenging, avoiding the worst of it, always looking for a way out, a safer place. They didn't offer grand plans or promises of rescue, just a shared understanding of the immediate, brutal reality. We were survivors, clinging to each other for a sliver of warmth in a dying world. The groans outside grew louder, a low tide of menace lapping at the edges of our temporary sanctuary. We had found each other, for now. The question remained, how much longer could we last? Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey. As the remnants of our past life crumble around us, and the unseen threat outside presses closer, it's crucial to remember the power of preparedness. The stories we've shared, from the desperate scramble for supplies in the early days to the tense negotiations for safe passage, all underscore a single, undeniable truth: prevention is paramount. Having a plan, even a rudimentary one, can mean the difference between life and oblivion. Always strive to have a basic emergency kit assembled, with water, non-perishable food, and a reliable way to purify more. Learn basic first aid. Knowledge is a tool as vital as any weapon. The chilling accounts of those who ventured out, only to be overwhelmed by the sheer, unrelenting nature of the danger, serve as stark reminders of the chaos that awaits the unprepared. Each encounter, each lost soul, reinforces the need for vigilance and a deep understanding of the new rules of survival. We saw how a simple misstep, a moment of complacency, could unravel weeks of careful planning. The individuals who managed to carve out small pockets of safety did so not through luck, but through foresight and a constant, unwavering commitment to self-reliance. They understood that no one was coming to save them, they had to save themselves. The sheer weight of despair can be a crippling enemy in itself, and we've witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of succumbing to it. That's why maintaining composure is more than just a psychological advantage, it's a survival imperative. When the groans outside intensify, and the darkness seems to swallow every hope, take a deep breath. Focus on the immediate task at hand, however small. The ability to think clearly under extreme duress is what separates those who adapt from those who are consumed. Remember the small victories, a secured door, a found can of food, a moment of shared silence with another survivor. These are the anchors that keep us grounded when the world is tearing itself apart. As our time together draws to a close, and the distant echoes of struggle continue to remind us of the precariousness of our existence, I urge you to carry these lessons forward. Look after yourselves, look after each other, and never underestimate the importance of being ready for the unexpected. Your ability to endure, to adapt, and to overcome depends on it. We hope these narratives have resonated with you and provided valuable insights. If you found this experience impactful, please consider subscribing for more stories and insights into navigating challenging times. We also encourage you to share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your perspective is invaluable as we all continue to learn and survive.